Howdy folks, my name is Bucket Fridge. I hope you're all doing very well today. Thank you so much for stopping by the channel. In today's video, we are going to go over the new warrior changes in the talent trees that they updated a few days ago. If you haven't seen my first video on the talent trees, I will put a card up in the description, whichever side it is on, and then you can use that as a reference from where we'll be starting off from today. So after a little bit of housekeeping, we'll jump right into the changes. Just the little bit of housekeeping. The thing that I always make sure that people know for my videos, again, this is always my personal opinion on the matter. This is something that I feel that I have a reasonable amount of expertise in, as I've played Warrior for a substantial amount of time. It is my favorite class. But also I always encourage everybody to go find as many content creators information on these things as they can, and then make the decisions that are best for you, so you can make the best decisions going forward for Dragonflight and whatever your needs and desires are for playing WoW. So we're going to do Prot first, then we'll do Arms, and then we'll do Fury. So let's hop into those changes. But just to let everybody know, this isn't going to be something where I discuss each talent point. I'm just going to go over the changes that happened, spec down the trees, and it's going to be a little more brief than the previous video. So let's hop right into it. Alrighty, Prot first. So we're going to go down the general tree, and then we'll go down the protection tree. So one of the things that they did is they reworked a little bit of this up here. They made it so Berserker Rage is able to go down into War Machine, which is really nice. So Prot doesn't have to spec into Berserker stance to get down to War Machine. The leech is another issue that I don't like it tied behind the Berserker stance. They have yet to change that, so this is still a little bit of an oof. I wouldn't mind at all if these two things swapped places here. And then we also have some changes down here where usually Rend was down on this side of the tree, but one thing that they did is they added Rend only to Prot and Arms, which is pretty interesting. Fury really wasn't a bleed spec to begin with, but I think it's pretty interesting that they changed that, and now that it isn't in the normal tree, it is in the spec specific trees. But let's go down the talents again. All right, so we're going to definitely take Rallying Cry, and the nice thing that I like about the change here is they led Rallying Cry right into Impending Victory, giving us another defensive almost, where it allows us to kind of keep our health up at a substantial level due to this, Indomitable, and Pain and Gain. So we're going to take that, and we're going to be pretty darn self-sufficient. Not quite blood DK levels of self-sufficient, but still very self-sufficient. Definitely want the Hone Reflexes, increase cooldown. We definitely want Spell Reflect, definitely want our Thunderclap, definitely want our Heroic Leap. We want to get our Berserker Rage, and then we will get War Machine for now. And then we're going to take Pain and Gain. I don't think we need Crushing Force, as it's Force Slam. We're going to skip Stormbolt for now. I'm building this as a raid environment, so we don't always need Stormbolt, so we won't spec into that for now. We definitely want to take Armor to the Teeth still. We definitely want our Double Time. It's incredible. We definitely want our Blood and Thunder, because we will be taking Rend in the Prot tree. This is still going to be an incredible source of damage for us. Then we got our one-handed weapon specialization, and then we have 7 points left before we can go down into the bottom portion of the tree. So let's take Furious Blows, more shield slam damage. Let's take Seismic Reverberations for some more damage and AoE threat, and we'll take Overwhelming Rage, and we will take Massacre. And then we have 3 points left to spend, so we have a few options here. I don't know that we necessarily need to take Bounding Stride all the time in a raid environment. If there's a lot of mobility, we can, but for now I think we'll just take Titanic Throw, a good way to pick up ads or pull the boss to a specific desired area. So we have 2 points left, so we could do something like, if we needed to, we could take Intervene, or one of the things that I actually like is they put the Inspiring Presence and Second Wind in this tree. Unfortunately, Second Wind isn't going to be really something that is going to be very useful as a tank, because when you're tanking, you're going to be taking damage, so this won't apply. It will only help heal you up after it is your turn to have the boss taunted off of you. So if we were going to take this one, I would definitely probably do the Inspiring Presence over Second Wind. And then we have 2 more points to spend, so let's go into, we'll say, Inspiring Presence, and then we will also get a let's get our Intimidating Shout. Alrighty. And then we're going to go down the bottom portion of the tree. The nice thing is they kept a lot of this the same. They made these sides a little better, which is really nice. Little 1-point nose. I think we obviously got to go into Avatar and into Unstoppable Force. So this is a key component of the Thunder Clapping God. And then I believe we take the Leech, or excuse me, not the Leech, the Cruel Strikes here for the crit, and then we take the Spear of Bastion, and then take the Piercing Verdict for the extra rage regeneration, which is really nice. And then we have 3 points to play around with. So what I would personally do is we definitely got to take Shockwave. I think Shockwave is in such an incredible cooldown, but in a fight where we don't necessarily need the extra stun, I would do something like this instead. So the big changes in the general tree, also keep in mind that if you need to take Intervene for something, you could take that instead of Intimidating Shout. We can do something like that instead, and then do these guys just like we had them. But the changes are pretty nice. I enjoy these so far. Like I really enjoy what they did with this portion of the tree. I really like that they made it more accessible without having to take Rend in this tree, because this part of the tree felt really bad for Fury just because there wasn't a ton of options here. And so putting Rend into these trees, they had to put more choices in here, which makes it pretty nice. And I really do like that they put Impending Victory off of Rallying Cry here down into Pain and Gain. On top of our Indomitable, that's actually quite a bit of self-sustain, and you could even go a smidge more into self-sustain if you wanted to spec 2 points into Berserker Stance and into the Leech. But let's hop into the actual spec tree for Prot. All right, let's go over the Prot changes. So I think the top part of the tree is relatively unchanged. The abilities are all still the same up here, if I believe, but the big difference comes down here in the middle part of this tree. There's actually quite a few changes. As you can tell, Rend is now in the Prot tree, and this area right here is actually so much better, I feel like, because you definitely want to take all 3 of these. The Blood Surge, because we are taking Rend, and the Devastator just as a way to get rid of Weapon Blow, and this actually does quite a bit of damage. And then we obviously want to go down into our Shield Wall, but the really cool thing that they did, so they buffed the Fueled by Violence up to 50% of your deep wounds. I still don't know if that is worth it. It's kind of tough, but what they did do instead is they put in Brutal Vitality, which is a conduit we have now, which is really nice because it doesn't make you choose Fueled by Violence. I believe Brutal Vitality is still probably going to net you more absorb or healing than Fueled by Violence will. So we will take the Brutal Vitality, which is really nice. And the cool thing here is they added a Spike Shield and Never Surrender. So the Spike Shield actually got a 10% damage increase up from 20%, but Never Surrender, they actually changed that. You'll know that that's a warrior talent that we have now, but it actually is based off of Ignore Pain and not blocking. So that's actually really interesting. Your block chance is increased by up to 20% based on your missing health. That's actually pretty huge if you think about it. So I really like this change, because Ignore Pain, while it is a good form of mitigation, not Warrior's primary source of mitigation. Blocking is our primary source of mitigation, and just getting extra block chance for getting slapped in our face is pretty nice. So we're going to take Never Surrender here. I don't know if the Bloodborne is worth it. It's a 2-point node now and increases the damage done by 30%. So there might be a world where you could go Fueled by Violence, because it's 50% now up from 30, and then this has an additional 30% damage, making this greater, which is fairly interesting. And it also increases the Rend damage from our Blood and Thunder, so this actually could be a pretty substantial damage increase, but time will tell if this is actually worth speccing into. And since we don't know for certain, because this is still alpha, I think we'll just go with what we know works instead. We'll spec out of that. We definitely want to get Bolster still, as that is incredible talent, and we still want to take Punish as opposed to Juggernaut for now. As we have discussed that in the previous video, you're not always going to be able to execute as Prot. Still taking our Thunderlord, a very crucial piece of the puzzle. And the interesting thing they put here as well is the improved Heroic Throw. Heroic Throw now deals additional 100% increased damage and inflicts deep wounds. And the physical damage is also sent to 5 enemies nearby. So this automatically will apply deep wounds to any of the targets that are nearby the one you Heroic Throw to, or Titanic Throw now, excuse me. But again, I don't know if that is worth the talent points, since there are so many good talent points in the Prot Warrior tree. It is just, we are in one of those scenarios where we have so many good talents, it is hard to pick the ones that don't have as much power as some of the ones we have access to, and these are kind of more of a secondary option in my opinion. I still think Into the Fray is a mandatory must. It is just so much haste, especially in the beginning of the expansion. Maybe towards the end of expansion, we can go heavy repercussions once our haste is a little more... once our haste stat is a little higher just due to gear. We're definitely going to go enduring defenses, as again, sudden death. I don't know that we necessarily need to go down into the execute route. Again, on farm you could do something like that, but probably not in the beginning. Definitely want anger management, and we definitely want the wall. We definitely want to go down to shields position, indomitable, and battle scarred veteran. Those are all crazy. Definitely want our outburst, and then we definitely want 2 points in that, so we have 1 point left. So it depends what we want to do. So we could always take it for Ravager. For a single target raid environment, I don't know that Ravager is worth it per se. So we could do something like this, where we take Enduring Alacrity, giving us the extra stamina and armor and the haste by 2%, as you only need to put 1 point in it to get to the 2% haste. Or there is a world as well where you could take out Never Surrender, and you could go down into it like that and do it that way. There is a lot of flexibility in the last part of the tree here, and they briefly touched on the shield charge and the champion's bulwark in a patch note. So I will read that. It says, the shield charge is the intention for this ability is that it would be used to charge into packs or dungeons or raids as an opener. Shield charge isn't competitive enough currently, and we'll be looking into this. They are toying with the idea of no minimum range, so it can be used at any time, and it would function more of a shield smash when you're within a certain distance, which is pretty cool. I really like the idea for that. Is if they were making this more competitive, this might actually be something that's worth speccing down into, especially as this will not have a necessary range. So if you're already in melee, it just means you could essentially shield slam the target again, which is a really cool idea, which actually might make it worth it. Because as Reprisal stands now, it's kind of an annoying talent to play around, to have to hop out and then charge back in, or intervene an ally and then charge back in. He can be kind of obnoxious to play around, so removing the minimum range actually would make this somewhat viable, and I imagine they'll probably increase the damage and the utility on this to make it more exciting. And then the Battle Scarred Veteran, they also updated us on that. Battle Scarred Veteran, we want this to remain powerful in terms of change. We're hopefully going to be able to balance this ability around the lockout period. Protection warriors are performing well in the game currently, but more so than other tanks, there's a low margin for error. Battle Scarred Veteran is intended to be a fallback in case you make a mistake. As we know, Battle Scarred Veteran is one of those crazy cooldowns. So these are pretty much the primary changes. Again, we'll go over them. The improved Titanic Throw or Heroic Throw is actually really cool. Addition, again, I don't know if you'll always spec into that. I really do like the change to Never Surrender. I think that's a pretty awesome ability. And Bloodborne is really interesting, potentially a lot of damage. And we also have Unnerving Focus again up here. As I mentioned, there's so many things inside the warrior tree that we want, and we have so many good options. It's hard to pick them all. We have to make some difficult choices, but as for now, these are the big changes to Prot. I'm really happy with a lot of the changes and where the devs were kind of mentioning what they were thinking in regards to making these changes. So overall, I still think Prot is probably the best tank in Alpha right now. Obviously I'm a little biased because I am a Prot warrior main, but the general consensus from what I can tell is that Prot warriors are by far and away the best tank right now. Not to say that the other tanks are not good, but Prot is just in an incredible place, and so we shall see how the tuning goes as we get towards the beta release and towards the eventual launch. But with protection on the way, let's hop into arms. Alrighty, let's go down the general tree, and then we'll go down the arms tree. So we'll kind of speed through this one, as we kind of already know. Again, defensive stance, very important. We're going to take our Rallying Cry and our Impending Victory, and we'll definitely take a Second Wind in this build, as arms has always had a little bit of trouble surviving, just because there's not a terrible amount of defensives. But with defensive stance, Pain and Gain, Impending Victory, Second Wind, I think we actually have a pretty substantial amount of defensives. Not to mention, we also get quite a few offensives. We definitely want to spec into War Machine. Arms needs all the rage generation it can get. Not to mention, we definitely want Slam and Whirlwind to do increased damage. We definitely are going to take our Seismic Reverberations, extra rage, improved Execute, our Blood and Thunder. And then at that point we can skip, and then we're going to take our Pain and Gain, our Armored to the Teeth, our Double Time, and so that leaves us with 3 points to play around with. Definitely want to take our Heroic throw, and I don't know that we need to spec into either of those, and so we are left with 2 points. We could do something like this and take some extra leech, getting us down into the bottom part of the tree. If we didn't need the leech from Berserker Stance, we could go, for example, into Impending Victory and then into Bounding Stride, or excuse me, Stormbolt and then into Bounding Stride. We could do something like that. It would just depend on what the specific fight called for. So for now, let's do it that way. I still think that we got to go down into Avatar and into Signet of Tormented Kings. I think this is still one of the larger damage increases. We definitely got to go into Cruel Strikes and get our two-handed weapon specialization. We're going to get our Spear of Bastion with our Elysian Might for some extra crit damage. And then we are left with 2 points. And I personally would actually go 1 into the Bitter Immunity here, and then the last point into Haste. So this is another really awesome cooldown for arms, another defensive that we can use. So we actually are going to be quite defensive as arms. A lot of really nice little changes. We have Impending Victory, Pain and Gain, Second Wind, Defensive Stance, Bitter Immunity, and Die by the Sword. So we actually are getting fairly survivable with these changes. It's actually really, really nice to see, and it won't feel terrible to have to play arms and not have cooldowns and just fall over. But let's get into the arms tree itself. Obviously got to take these points, mandatory points. We're going to take our Die by the Sword. So this one also has the Fueled by Violence, but this actually becomes a lot more interesting as arms is obviously going to be doing a lot more damage than Prot is, potentially. Prot might be pretty silly, at least on AoE packs, but this actually is pretty interesting when you're thinking about the amount of damage that you're going to be doing as arms, and whether it's worth it or not, we'll have to see. But this actually is fairly interesting that it's increased to 50%, especially because they also got Bloodborne, which increases the damage done by deep wounds, as we discussed in the Prot tree. So I think there might actually be a viable build with bleeds, but for now I think we will skip it. And I think what we're going to take instead is obviously improved Mortal Strike, and we obviously want the improved Execute. But for now, I think we're going to go with Storm Wall instead. This ability seems pretty crazy. If you do have to pop Die by the Sword, you're obviously in a scenario where you probably need life as well. So for now, we will go Storm Wall, but Fueled by Violence actually might be useful in arms, which is kind of surprising, but a nice change. Definitely want to go into Punishment, as that is the Venthyr ability right now. Really, really good. We definitely want more overpower damage. Definitely want our critical strike damage. And then as you can tell here, we have Rend inside of the arms tree, just like we had Rend inside of the Prot tree. Really cool change. And some of the changes that they talked about as well that was really interesting was, let me see if I can find the patch notes very quickly. The Fracture now causes Deep Wounds, Rend, and Thunderous Roar bleed effects to instantly expire all the time remaining. So Fracture down here after Skull Splitter actually just causes any of the bleeds or anything you have on them to instantly expire, doing all their damage. So Fracture actually might be something that you can combine with Bloodborne and Fueled by Violence for actually quite a bit of sustained healing and self-healing for that matter. So that actually might be a viable route, but we'll have to see. I don't know that it's going to be better than the traditional Colossal Smash and Blade Storm build, but time will tell. We definitely want Dreadnought still, as that is an incredible ability. We're going to spec down into Sweeping Strikes, and so I'm going to leave these open for now as I'm building a raid environment where we don't always need to be doing extra AoE damage. This is more of a single target environment, so we're definitely going to take Colossal Smash still. Test of Might is still an incredible ability. Going to take Anger Management, as this is single target. We won't spec it down into Warbreaker, but they did mention with Warbreaker, people were fairly unhappy that both Colossal Smash and Warbreaker were 2 different talents, but they touched on that and said, we've seen some feedback regarding why these are separate talents and require investment into 2 talent points. 30% increased damage with the option to apply it to multiple targets on a fairly short cooldown is a massive effect. It is far more worth than the average talent, especially those located at the 20 gate. We will see if it's fair to split these into separate components as it is in the current live game. So that's pretty interesting. We'll see what they do with that, but for now we won't spec down into this as we are going to be in a single target raid environment. We'll definitely take Sudden Death as we are having the improved Execute, so being able to execute outside of our big windows is very nice as well, leaving us 1 point. And I think what we'll do in this case is we'll go Exhilarating Blows. Mortal Strike has the ability to reset itself. Mortal Strike is obviously a very key component in our build, so we'll take that for now. Again, I don't know if the bleed if the bleed side of the tree is going to be the meta route as it stands now. Time will tell with the tuning, but again, there is possibly a route where this actually nets you a serious amount of damage. But for now, I think we got to go down into Old Reliable, got to go down into Bladestorm, and we got to go down into Blunt Instruments. I still think Blunt Instruments is better, but they did touch on this as well, saying Sharpened Blades and Blunt Instruments. As with the simple talents mentioned earlier in this update, having some guidance from the talents rather than everything being wide open can be helpful for some of our less knowledgeable players. We are aware of the polarizing feedback here, but we want to get this in front of more players throughout the alpha and beta before we decide if it needs to be removed. If it doesn't work out, we're happy to change it, which is nice to see. Again, what they mean by that is that they actually require for Blunt Instruments to have a mace or polearm, and then you have to have an actual axe or sword to use sharpened blades correctly. And so that's kind of everybody's been kind of like, really? Like, that seems kind of silly, and I tend to agree with that opinion. So we'll see if this works out over time. Then we definitely want to take our Unhinged. That's one of the legendaries currently. Then we're going to spec down into our Critical Thinking, our Juggernaut. Everybody knows how crazy a Juggernaut is, and then down into Exploiter, leaving us 1 point to play around with. We could go something like Skull Banner if that is something we needed for our team, or if there was a more heavy cleave scenario, you could take something like Collateral Damage or Storm of Swords, or you could even spec into Warbreaker, Cleave. There's a few different options that we can go here, but what I think we'll take instead, I think Blood Surge is a fantastic talent. Our bleeds granting us more rage. More rage means more damage, and more damage means we are higher on the logs, so that is always good. So the changes are really nice. Again, we'll go briefly touch over the changes. The Skull Splitter cooldown, I believe, went up a smidge, up from 21 seconds to 30. Fracture, again, now makes all your bleeds instantly expire, which is pretty darn cool. And they also changed the Fueled by Violence and the Storming Wall here, all of which are pretty cool changes. I believe the bottom part of the tree largely remained the same. I don't know if anything actually changed. The biggest changes coming right here through the middle, and a few of them up top. But I think these changes to arms leave it in a pretty good place. We'll have to see how the different tuning works, whether this Colossal Smash and like Bladestorm build will be better than a Bleed build. I'm excited to try both. But I think the changes, especially acknowledging the difficulties that lie in here and the kind of low damage of this side of the tree, and changing a lot of those things, is actually really good to see. So I'm quite happy with the arms changes. So let's hop into Fury. All right, last but certainly not least, Fury. Unfortunately, I still don't think Berserker Stance is very good. So we will be taking a Battle Stance, which still feels really bad. Having to spend an initial point in here just to get the better stance doesn't feel very good. Fury is tankier than Arms, so I don't think that we need to take defensive stance. But let's go down into Rallying Cry, as that's one of the main reasons you bring Warrior. I think Second Wind is very powerful here. Definitely going to take Impending Victory, Honed Reflexes. Let's go down this side of the tree. Since we actually have Berserker Stance, we'll take some Leech, we'll take some War Machine for extra rage regeneration, and we'll take some Furious Blows, allowing us to get down into the bottom part, or excuse me, the middle part of the tree. Gonna take, again, Pain and Gain here. Crushing Force is interesting. You're not always hitting Slam all the time. It has a 10% increased critical chance. That's not always super applicable, so I think just for defensiveness, we'll take Pain and Gain. But if the fight is, say, on farm, you could always take Crushing Force for a smidge extra damage. So, but for now, we'll just be defensive and look at this as a prog rating fight. Then we definitely want to take Arm to the Teeth and Double Time. Definitely want to take our Seismic Reverberations, the extra rage, and Massacre. Always very useful. So now we got 6 points to play around with. I think you obviously take Heroic Leap. I think Spell Reflect is one of those too good not to pick. We definitely want to take our Bounding Stride, as we don't want to take our Titanic Throw, as we don't need that, as we are not going to be tanking. And then we will take Frothing Berserker, leaving us 2 points to play around with. So why don't we go into Berserker Rage for now, and then we have 1 extra point where we could play around with and use it for a variety of options, whether we need the extra movement speed, a on-demand stun, a fear, or a slow. There are lots of options that we could take. Obviously, Fury does not have access to Rend, so Blood and Thunder and Thunderclap are not really necessary for Fury. But for now, let's just take a little bit of extra utility, and we'll take, say, Piercing Howl to slow mobs or those kind of things. But a single target raid environment, that could be substituted for, say, the movement speed if we didn't want to take either of those. Alrighty, then I think we need to get the increased haste down here. We definitely want to get the increased dual wielding damage, thunderous roar, as we are already speccing down this side, and we're going to take the dauntless duelist. Very, very good still. And then I think we want to go down into avatar still and signet of tormented kings, as the fury has 3 ways to proc the signet of tormented kings, which is really nice. And something that they added too is that ravager also triggers signet of the tormented kings, which is really cool. So technically fury has 4 ways to trigger signet, which is very, very nice, leaving us with 2 points to play around with. We could do something like taking the extra crit chance, or we could take the bitter immunity for an extra defensive and then a little bit in the crit chance. So why don't we do something like that, be a little bit more survival, and then we'll take a little bit of extra crit chance. So overall, pretty nice changes, not having to spec into Thunderclap for Blood and Thunder and Rend. I didn't think that was going to be very good for Fury anyways, as like I mentioned, they're not really a bleed class. But I think the overall changes for the general tree for Fury work out pretty well. Again, we're still pretty tanky. I really, really do hope that they do something with Berserker Stance, because right now it's still kind of bleh. And so we'll see what they do with that. But for now, I think this is the way that I would build Fury. So let's hop into the specific tree. All right, let's go down the Fury tree. So I'll read some of the things that they were talking about with Fury. We're doing something fairly experimental with single-minded Fury. We're unsure if it will work out as intended. We've made Titan's Grip baseline for a variety of reasons, but primarily because it makes many things much simpler. As with the arms tree, you're now forced to take in rage regeneration to ensure you have a minimum amount of survivability. A dead warrior deals no DPS. Annihilator is intended to work with most rampaging blow modifiers, and then they're also working on subsequent nodes from Odin's Fury and Ravager. These will be choice nodes and will have more to share in the future. But let's hop into the rest of the talents. There has been quite a bit of rearranging, which is actually really quite nice, and a few updates to some positionings, all of which I think are very beneficial, and we'll get into those as we go down the tree. Alrighty, so these are obviously non-negotiables. These are all very good in rage regeneration and incredible defense. I think Warpaint will probably be a little bit better than Invigorating Fury, as just taking less damage is always better than taking more damage and then being able to heal it, in my opinion. Damage prevented. What's the saying? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of the cure, so to speak, right? So I believe that taking less damage is just better, as we want to be enraged as much as possible, as that gives us our extra haste. We definitely want to be taking our Bloodthirst increased damage, and we definitely want to be taking improved Raging Blow, allowing us to get down into the bottom part of the tree. Rampage being right here, and they combined the Rampage talents that they had earlier, which is very nice to see. And then we're going to take the no auto attack penalty, and if you'll know from my other video, I love Cold Steel Hot Blood. That ability is incredible. And the very nice thing that they did here is they put the cadence of Fujita and the Bloodborne in this part right here, because if you're taking Cold Steel Hot Blood, I'm very much assuming that they realize that if you're going to be taking Cold Steel Hot Blood, you're probably likely either going to be wanting to take Bloodborne or Cadence. So I think for now, we'll take Cadence, as the extra haste is very, very nice. We're going to be using our Bloodthirst on cooldown, obviously, and stacking more haste as Fury is very good, very, very good. And then I actually think you want all 3 of these middle ones, as Frenzy is, again, additional haste. This with haste, this with haste, and this with haste. We want to be using our ability as quickly as possible. Again, more rage regeneration, the better. And the nice thing is we can pretty much avoid these talents here, but I actually do think this new Blood Craze is really good. Bloodthirst increases the critical strike chance of your next Bloodthirst by 10%, stacking up to 5 times. And as we know, more Cold Steel Hot Blood procs from Bloodthirst is very good, and going something like Bloodborne is also a viable option here. So we can leave this as Cadence, but I think both of these nodes are very good, and just being able to completely avoid this side of the tree is really nice. They want Titan's Grip to to be the primary competitive spec, so we are not going to spec down into obviously any of the single-minded fury. I think we want to take all three of these. Rampaging Blow has a chance to refund itself, which is really good. Slaughtering Strikes is also very, very good, another talent they added in fairly recently. And Recklessness, as always, leaving us 3 points. One thing that they really did add, or that they added that I really did like, is they actually put Siegebreaker up here, which is really, really interesting, because if you'll remember, it was actually down here and it wasn't even available for use most of the time, just because you were going usually down the middle side of the tree over here and usually taking Ravager. So getting Siegebreaker right in the middle is actually pretty darn huge. And one of the things that they added to Siegebreaker that I really, really like is that they added it so obviously we're going to take Siegebreaker, but the Deafening Crash increased Siegebreaker's duration, but Raging Blow has an increased 10% critical strike chance for enemies affected. So more crit is always very, very nice. But if we didn't need the extra crit, we could always take something like Wrath of Fury instead. So this is kind of a higher top end source of damage, but also a very reliable source. But I think we'll just take the easy 10% extra damage here. And then we can go down into Old Reliable. Definitely Anger Management is still our best bet. I still think Unbridled Ferocity is very good, and Depths of Insanity are both very good, leaving us with a little bit of room for wiggling. So what we could do, we don't know what they're going to put under Odin's Fury. As you'll remember, the Cadence of Fujita was under Odin's Fury, which is interesting. But again, we can take Skull Banner if necessary, but we also could take something like this, speccing into Ravager, as Signet activates Ravager as well, giving us actually all 4 options to be able to proc Signet, which is very nice, leaving us with 2 points to play around. We could do something like this where we take Odin's Fury and then whatever Odin's Fury's modifier will be. And then also, if we didn't want to take the Cadence, we could take Bloodborne, because that also increases the Odin's Fury damage as well. But let's say for now we don't know what is going to be in this slot, so we could take Skull Banner here instead, which is really nice. I really love having Siegebreaker up here in the top part of the tree. There is so many good talents in this row right here. They made the way that this branches off that you can take either one of these paths is really, really nice. All these talents work really well together. I think this is a way better iteration of the Fury tree. I really, really like the changes. Again, being able to spec into Cold Steel Hot Blood and these right here and having this choice node is awesome. And then we'll have to see what they do with Odin's Fury modifier. But Ravager also being able to be taken going down from Siegebreaker is awesome. Now you don't have to choose between them. You get both. And then we always have the all-important Skull Banner if needed. But if we don't need the Skull Banner, again, we could do something like this or even put it into the extra duration. Fury is looking really, really solid. Alrighty, folks, that's going to wrap up the warrior changes. I appreciate everybody tuning into this video. Make sure to like and subscribe to keep up to date with all the changes. I primarily cover tanks on this channel, but I have quite a bit of experience with Fury and Arms, as Warrior is my favorite class. But I primarily will be focusing on tanks going forward. We have the Death Knight video coming later this week, as there were some changes to that, which is pretty nice. And then we will do Prot Paladin after that, and then probably Bear, and we are still waiting on Demon Hunter. So if those things interest you, make sure to subscribe. But again, I appreciate everybody watching. I hope everybody will stay safe and be kind, and I will catch you all in the next one.